The shriek of shearing metal was a blasphemy. It wasn't merely a sound. It was a physical violation, a jagged, violent tear through the serene tapestry of the suburban morning. It was a sound that didn't belong in Oak Creek, a sound of industrial-scale failure dropped into a world of gentle counterpoint, the whisper of birdsong from ancient oaks, the distant hum of a pool filter, and the rhythmic, meditative hiss of lawn sprinklers painting arcs of liquid crystal across emerald lawns. It was a sound of pure, mechanical agony, and, in one catastrophic moment, it obliterated everything else, leaving a ringing, deafening silence in its wake. There, half swallowed by the Hendersons' magnificent, meticulously cultivated rose garden, lay a canary yellow shuttle bus. It was twisted into a grotesque parody of a vehicle, a broken toy left by a careless giant. Steam erupted from its crushed hood in furious, white plumes, the dying breath of a colossal, metal beast. The scent of hot antifreeze and spilled gasoline began to poison the sweet, cloying perfume of hundreds of crushed roses, creating a nauseating olfactory cocktail of life and death, of beauty and brutal machinery. The vibrant reds, pinks, and yellows of the blooms were smeared like war paint across the mangled chrome and shattered glass. Through the crazed, crystalline spiderwebs of the shattered windows, the small, pale faces of children were visible. They were frozen in a tableau of silent shock, a gallery of portraits captured at the exact moment innocence was fractured. Some faces were streaked with the clean, noiseless tracks of tears, silent rivulets carving paths through a layer of dust and shock. Other faces were utterly blank, their eyes wide and unseeing, stuck in a state of suspended animation so profound it was more terrifying than any scream. My heart, which moments before had been beating with the steady, metronomic rhythm of professional observation, became a frantic, hammering fist against the cage of my ribs. My breath caught, a knot of ice forming in my throat. This was no random, tragic accident. My eyes, scanning the wreckage with a cold, practiced efficiency honed by years of reviewing accident reports, snagged on a detail that turned my blood to ice water, a garish floral scarf, a slash of offensively cheerful fabric, was tangled in the buckled, defeated remnants of the steering wheel. I had seen that exact scarf not 15 minutes ago, wrapped around the neck of a woman whose very presence was a low-grade atmospheric disturbance. Karen Peterman. Just a short while earlier, my world had been the sterile, beige landscape of folding chairs and the faint, acrid aroma of hours-old coffee from a sputtering urn in the Oak Creek Community Hall. I was Elias Vance, a name that meant nothing to the 30-odd people in this room. To them, I was just a new face, a quiet man in a neatly pressed shirt, perhaps a recent transplant to Oak Creek, trying to understand the local politics of lawn care. In reality, I was the new regional chief for the Department of Transportation. This clandestine attendance was part of a personal initiative I called ground truthing. My official mandate, written in the dry, passionless language of government directives, was to assess and improve the efficiency and safety of community transportation infrastructures, with a laser focus on services for vulnerable populations. But I had spent a decade navigating the labyrinthine corridors of state government, and I knew that reports, statistics, and official briefings were filters. They were designed to smooth the rough edges, sanitize the uncomfortable realities, and obscure the very human truths I needed to understand. To do my job effectively, to actually make a difference instead of just generating paperwork, I needed the unvarnished, unfiltered version. I needed to see the cracks in the pavement, not just read the repair budget. I needed to be an anonymous face in the crowd. So, here I sat, at the back of the Oak Creek Homeowners Association monthly meeting, my notebook open, feigning a deep interest in a surprisingly passionate debate over acceptable lawn fertilization schedules and the legal ramifications of perpetually barking dogs. The HOA president, a weary-looking man named Bill, who looked like he'd rather be having a root canal, was trying to mediate between two neighbors whose feud over a shared fence line had apparently escalated to involve passive-aggressive garden gnome placement. The meeting droned on, a perfect microcosm of suburban anxieties. Then, the machine ground to a halt with the arrival of Karen. She didn't walk into the room. She made an entrance. She moved like a localized weather system, a whirlwind of sharp, cloying perfume, and an almost tangible aura of unshakable self-importance. I had read the file on the Oak Creek HOA before coming, a thick manila folder filled with years of meticulously documented complaints. And her name, Karen Peterman, was a recurring theme, a leitmotif of discontent. "It takes an absolute eternity to get to the Willow Creek shopping plaza," she announced, her voice a stiletto heel on a marble floor, cutting through Bill's weary monologue on fence etiquette. He flinched. "Karen, we've discussed this. The schedule is tight. Arthur does his best." "Arthur's best isn't good enough," she countered, her eyes scanning the room for allies and finding only averted gazes. "The schedule is a joke. It's a complete and utter waste of our HOA dues. We're paying for a glorified taxi service that caters to a select few." She paused for dramatic effect, letting her words hang in the stale air. "And all those special needs children. They slow it down to a crawl. The lift, the harnessing. It's 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. It adds up." Her gaze flickered briefly towards a quiet woman in the third row, a woman with kind eyes and lines of exhaustion etched around them. A woman I would soon know as Carol Gable. Honestly, must it stop at every single designated curb? "We're not running a charity service here." She took a breath, her grievance becoming more personal, more raw. A wound she seemed determined to show everyone. "Some of us have jobs to get to. Real jobs. With deadlines. I lost a very important client last year because this bus, our bus, made me 35 minutes late for a deposition." 35 minutes. Do you know what that cost me? It was the final straw for my firm. They let me go. Said I was unreliable. I'm a single mother, trying to freelance as a paralegal from my dining room table. And I can't even rely on the services my own dues pay for to get to the library for research. A ripple of profound discomfort, a visible, physical wave, moved through the room. It was a complex reaction, a mix of pity, annoyance, and fear. Some people felt a pang of sympathy for the struggling single mother, while others, who had heard this speech before, simply wished she would sit down. Mrs. Gable flinched as if struck. Her son, Mikey, relied on that shuttle, his custom wheelchair, his gateway to physical therapy, and the limited social life a child with his condition could have, was a familiar sight in the neighborhood. Her hand tightened on her purse strap, her knuckles turning white. But she remained silent, her face a stoic mask. This, I was learning, was the community's conditioned response to Karen. Appeasement through silence. A collective, unspoken decision that the path of least resistance was to let the storm pass. This was my opening. This was the raw, unfiltered data I craved. "Perhaps," I began, calibrating my voice to a pitch of friendly, unassuming curiosity, "we could discuss your concerns in more detail. I'm new to the community, just trying to get the lay of the land, understand how things work, like a carnivorous plant sensing movement." Karen turned her full attention to me, her features softening slightly under the spotlight of a fresh, sympathetic audience. She launched into a detailed, self-aggrandizing monologue about gross inefficiencies, padded schedules, and what she termed excessive, and frankly, insulting safety precautions. She painted a picture of herself as a lone crusader for fiscal responsibility, a hard-working single mother fighting against a tide of bureaucratic waste and suburban mollycoddling. "I'm not a monster," she said, a practiced note of wounded reason in her voice that was genuinely convincing. "I love children, but I also believe in efficiency, in value. This community seems to have forgotten what that means, and it's people like me who pay the price." As the meeting finally, mercifully, dissolved in a collective, unspoken sigh of relief, she spotted them, a set of keys, labeled in bold letters, "Community Shuttle," hung from a small, unassuming hook by the main door. The regular driver, the aforementioned Arthur, had called in sick with the flu. His temporary replacement, a young man who looked barely out of his teens and was clearly overwhelmed, had evidently left them there in a moment of forgetfulness while using the restroom. A predatory, reptilian gleam flickered in Karen's eyes. It was a look of sudden, dangerous, and monumentally stupid inspiration. But for a split second, I saw something else there, too, a flicker of pure desperation, of a woman pushed to a reckless edge, a woman who felt she had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. She glanced around the room, her gaze lingering for a loaded moment on Mrs. Gable, who was quietly helping another mother fold up a stroller. "You know what," Karen declared to the room at large, her voice bright with a manic, theatrical purpose that felt both rehearsed and terrifyingly spontaneous. "Talk is cheap. Action speaks louder than words." She started towards the door, her steps brisk and decisive. A cold dread began to prickle at the back of my neck. I started to rise from my chair. "I'll just take this for a quick spin," she said, her voice a little too loud, as if she were trying to convince herself as much as the room. For a brief instant, her hand hovered over the keys. A fractional hesitation. In that moment, the entire trajectory of the morning could have changed. Her fingers trembled almost imperceptibly, but then her jaw set. A stubborn line of resolve. "I just want to help. Really. You'll all see that I was right." She snatched the keys from the hook. The metallic jingle was unnaturally loud in the quiet hall. Panic, sharp and cold, finally pierced the room's post-meeting lethargy. "Mrs. Gable" shot to her feet, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning terror. "Karen, no, please. Don't. My son is on that bus. The other children, their physical therapy session at the clinic just ended. They're waiting for the ride home right now." Her plea was thin and desperate, a thread of sound in the stunned hall. Karen paused at the door, her hand on the handle. She turned, and for a moment, her mask of righteous indignation cracked completely. I saw a flash of raw, bitter resentment, a wound that had been festering for years. "You think you're the only one who has it hard. Carol," she snapped, her voice low and venomous. "Try getting fired because you're a few minutes late one too many times. Try explaining to your daughter why you can't afford the ballet lessons her friends are taking. Maybe if this community cared about working people instead of coddling everyone, I wouldn't have to do this to be heard with that." She was gone, pushing through the heavy door. A chilling, triumphant laugh, or maybe it was a sob, echoed back into the shocked silence. I was on my feet in an instant. My Department of Transportation credentials, a symbol of immense regulatory power, felt like a useless leaden weight in my jacket pocket. Bureaucracy couldn't stop a moving vehicle. I sprinted out the door, my polished dress shoes, so appropriate for a government chief, slipping on the smooth pavement. My mind raced. Call 911, protocol, report it. But my body was already moving, fueled by a primal, protective instinct that overrode all procedure. By the time I reached the street, the yellow shuttle was already halfway down the block, It lurched forward, accelerating at a velocity that was wildly, criminally unsafe for a quiet residential road. The small engine whined in a high-pitched protest, a mechanical scream of abuse. I could see the small silhouettes of the children through the rear window, their heads bobbing like apples in a barrel as they were thrown against their restraints. I ran, my lungs burning, shouting her name into the wind, a useless gesture against the roar of the straining engine. Then came the sound, the sickening, percussive crunch of metal folding in on itself, followed by the crystalline, explosive shatter of glass. The world seemed to go silent for a heartbeat. The symphony of the suburbs had ended. The nightmare had begun. Now, standing in the epicenter of the chaos, the acrid, metallic stench of gasoline and leaking antifreeze mingling with the sweet, funereal perfume of crushed rose petals, the full, horrifying weight of Karen's hubris crashed down on me. These weren't just passengers on a manifest. They were children. Lily, who always had a book with her. The twins, Sam and Ben, who were nonverbal but communicated with a complex language of shared glances. And Mikey Gable, whose fragile body housed an impossibly bright and curious mind. Their safety had been entrusted to a system she had hijacked for a petulant, ego-driven tantrum. My training, dormant for years behind a mahogany desk, surged to the forefront. "Everyone stay back," I commanded, my voice sharper and louder than I intended, a blade that cut through the stunned, murmuring silence of the gathering crowd. "I'm a first responder. There's a fuel leak. Please, give me space." Parents were arriving now, drawn by the horrific sound, their ordinary weekday mornings shattered into a million jagged pieces. Their faces were canvases of dawning horror as they recognized the mangled bus, their children's lifeline to a world of therapy and social engagement. I saw Mr. Henderson, a kind, gentle man known for his soft-spoken nature, his face ashen. His gaze was fixed on the ruin of his prize-winning roses, a sanctuary of beauty and order his wife had tended for 3 decades, now violated and destroyed. He was a secondary casualty, but his pain was palpable, a symbol of the broader violation of their shared peace. I wrenched open the shuttle's emergency door, its protesting groan a painful echo of the initial crash. The hiss of leaking fuel grew louder, a venomous whisper beneath the plumes of steam. Inside, the scene was one of surreal, terrifying stillness. The heavy-duty safety restraints, the very ones Karen had railed against as excessive, had held. The children were shaken, terrified, but alive. A young girl with Down syndrome, Lily, clutched a small, tattered teddy bear to her chest as if it were a shield. Its button eyes stared blankly. Her own eyes, wide and dark, were fixed on me, filled with a depth of fear she couldn't possibly articulate. "It was so loud," she whispered, her voice a fragile, trembling thread of sound. The lady was laughing. Then she yelled, "We!" Beside her, one of the twins, Sam, had a nasty gash on his forehead from a piece of flying debris, blood matting his dark hair. He was eerily silent, staring at his twin, Ben, who was crying without a sound. My gaze found Karen. She was slumped against the driver's side window, dazed but conscious. Her flamboyant scarf was a cruel, colorful noose twisted around the mangled steering column. The manic energy was gone, replaced by a dazed look of profound annoyance, as if she'd been personally inconvenienced by a pothole. "Honestly," she mumbled, shaking her head as if to clear a minor headache. "The brakes. They felt soft. Definitely a maintenance issue." I told them this thing was a death trap. See, I was right. A rage, cold, sharp, and precise, sliced through my adrenaline. This wasn't a mistake born of desperation. This was a willful, deliberate act of criminal negligence. now being cloaked in a new layer of self-serving lies. I reached into my jacket, my fingers closing around the cool, solid, reassuring weight of my badge. I pulled it out, holding it up so the morning sun flashed off the embossed gold seal of the Department of Transportation. "Karen Peterman," I said, my voice low, utterly devoid of heat. Each word a chip of ice. "You are under arrest for reckless endangerment, aggravated assault, and the hijacking of a commercial vehicle." Her eyes, hazy with self-pity, snapped into sharp focus. Disbelief warred with a flash of her usual indignation. "Arrest? Don't be ridiculous." "On what authority?" "It was an accident. I was trying to help. I identified a safety issue." "Help?" The word was a raw wound, torn from Mrs. Gable's throat as she finally pushed through the onlookers, her face a mask of pure, primal fury and terror. She had just seen her son, Mikey, being carefully lifted out by a paramedic. His face pale, but his eyes burning with a fear that lanced her mother's heart. "You could have killed our children. You could have killed my son. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Other parents, their initial shock finally giving way to a tidal wave of protective rage, surged forward, their voices rising in a unified chorus of disbelief and condemnation. The scene dissolved into the controlled chaos of flashing red and blue lights, the wail of approaching sirens finally arriving to score the suburban nightmare. Paramedics, their faces calm and professional, moved with quiet efficiency, checking each child. Police officers began unfurling yellow tape, their faces grim, transforming a peaceful neighborhood street into a major crime scene. I stepped aside, my phone pressed hard against my ear, giving a clipped, precise, and furious briefing to my deputy director, the full weight of my position. The power I had so recently acquired settled onto my shoulders not as a burden, but as a righteous and necessary weapon. This was no longer about assessing infrastructure. It was about dismantling the toxic mindset that allowed a Karen to flourish, and ensuring, with the full, unyielding force of federal regulation, that this could never, ever happen again. The days that followed were a maelstrom of procedural machinery whirring to life. Investigations, depositions, and a seemingly endless series of emergency community meetings. The story of Karen's practical demonstration spread like a digital wildfire, a sensational headline that nonetheless resonated as a terrifyingly familiar archetype. The HOA, reeling from the catastrophic liability and the tsunami of public shame, convened an emergency meeting in the very same hall where the disaster had been conceived. The air inside was thick and heavy, with a mixture of righteous anger, collective fear, and a palpable sense of shared guilt for their years of collective passivity. In my office at the DOT, the reality was more frustrating. I was buried in paperwork, fielding calls from news agencies, and fighting a legal system that moved at a glacial pace. Karen, out on bail, had hired a slick, high-powered attorney named Marcus Thorne, who was already spinning a compelling narrative, that of a persecuted, financially struggling single mother who had suffered a momentary lapse in judgment under immense stress. He was painting her as the victim, and the district attorney's office, wary of a costly trial, was already floating the idea of a plea bargain reckless driving, maybe, with probation and community service. The thought made my stomach turn. I sat across from my lead investigator, a grizzled, no-nonsense veteran named Martinez. "They're buying her story," I said, rubbing my temples. "The stressed single mom angle is playing well. We need something more." "We've got the black box data," Martinez said, tapping a file. "Shows excessive speed, erratic acceleration. It's good, but her lawyer will just say it proves she was panicking, that she wasn't familiar with the vehicle. What we need is the dual cam footage. The lab is trying to recover it from the damaged drive. It's our only shot at proving intent. Meanwhile, the human cost was becoming clearer every day. I made it a point to visit the families. I sat in the Gables' living room, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic. Mikey was subdued. His usual bright spark dimmed. He was having nightmares, Carol told me, waking up screaming about the laughing lady and the loud crash. He refused to even look at his wheelchair. He told me he's afraid of it now, she said, her voice breaking. He said it's a cage. The thing that was his freedom is now his cage. I also spoke with Mr. Henderson. He stood in his ruined garden, looking at the gaping wound in the earth. It's not the flowers, Mr. Vance, he told me, his voice thick with emotion. Eleanor, my wife, she's in the late stages of Alzheimer's. Some days, she doesn't know me, but she always knew her roses. Her father helped her plant the first bush here, the day we moved in 30 years ago. It was her anchor, her last piece of solid ground. She'd sit at the window for hours, just watching them. Now, she just stands at the window and cries. She doesn't know why. She just knows something beautiful is gone. The crash wasn't just property damage. It was the desecration of a memory, the theft of a dying woman's last comfort. The climax was not a courtroom drama, but the town hall meeting, convened to discuss the future of the community's transportation system. The hall was packed to bursting. Local news cameras lined the back wall like a firing squad. The air was electric, a volatile, compressed mixture of residual trauma and a deep, collective hunger for catharsis. The DA's office had told me that morning they were finalizing the plea deal. This was my last chance. I stood at the podium, not just to condemn, but to rebuild, armed with a multi-point plan for new safety protocols, mandatory psychological screening for drivers, and a new community oversight committee. Just as I began to speak, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from Martinez. My heart leaped. Got it. It's worse than we thought. Link attached. Play the forward cam footage. Good luck. At that exact moment, as if on cue, the main doors swung open. Karen, flanked by her expensive, reptilian lawyer, made her entrance. It was a calculated, audacious performance. Her lawyer, Thorne, spoke first, his voice as smooth as polished stone, speaking of a momentary, regrettable lapse in judgment by a deeply community-minded citizen who has suffered immensely. Then, Karen herself stepped forward, her face a carefully constructed mask of profound sorrow, tears welling in her eyes on cue, catching the light of the news cameras. I only ask for your forgiveness, she whispered into the microphone, her voice trembling artfully. I was scared, and I made a terrible mistake. I ask for a second chance to prove that I've learned my lesson and can be a productive member of this community once more. The performance was good. I saw a few faces in the crowd soften. The narrative was working, but the spell was broken. Mrs. Gable stood, not with the frantic anger of the crash scene, but with the powerful, unshakable calm of a woman who had been to hell and back and had nothing left to fear. Our children's safety is not a lesson for you to learn from. Karen, your actions have consequences. Real, lasting consequences that our families will be dealing with for years. And you must face them. Her voice, clear and strong, filled the hall. Then, Mr. Henderson stood. You didn't just destroy roses. You destroyed my wife's peace of mind. One by one. They rose, a silent, powerful tide of humanity turning against her. They didn't shout. They didn't scream. They simply stood, a wall of quiet, unyielding, absolute condemnation. My heart pounded in my chest. I hadn't seen the video myself. It was a hell of a risk to play it blind. But I trusted Martinez. I trusted the truth. I gave a signal to the tech booth. Put this on the screen. Now. The large screen behind me flickered to life, showing the forward-facing camera footage in crystal clear high definition. The room fell utterly silent. We saw the road from the bus's perspective. It was straight. It was clear. No obstacles. No sudden darting animals. No reason to swerve. Then, we all saw it together. A deliberate, sharp, violent jerk of the wheel. A calculated, malicious swerve towards the Hendersons' curb. She hadn't been avoiding a danger. She had been seeking one out. The bus mounted the sidewalk with a bone-jarring lurch. And, for a single, horrifying split second before the world devolved into a chaotic blur of green leaves and shattering glass, the camera caught the reflection of Karen's face in the rearview mirror. It wasn't a face of panic, or fear, or stress. It was a flicker of a cruel, triumphant smile. The smile of someone who had just proven her point in the most dramatic way possible, creating the accident that would validate all her complaints and give her grounds to sue the HOA into oblivion. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. It was the sound of 100 people understanding true malice at the same instant. In the front row, little Lily, sitting with her parents, pointed a small, trembling finger at the frozen image on the screen. Her voice, though small, carried with chilling clarity through the tomb-like silence of the hall. "That's the smile," she said, the laughing smile. She looked right at me, faced with this final, irrefutable, public unveiling of her true self. Karen's facade finally, irrevocably shattered. The performative tears turned into ragged, ugly sobs of pure, narcissistic self-pity as the truth of her malice was laid bare for all to see. Her lawyer, a man paid to spin fiction, but smart enough to recognize a narrative he could not control, quickly and unceremoniously guided her out of the hall, his face a grim stone mask. Her wails echoed behind them like a vanquished phantom. The falling action was swift and blessedly decisive. The DA, his face pale after watching the video on a reporter's phone, withdrew all plea offers on the spot. The trial was a formality. The video evidence was absolute. Karen was convicted on all charges and sentenced to a prison term that made state headlines, a number that acknowledged the profound malice of her actions. The civil suit was equally successful. The court ordered the complete seizure and liquidation of her assets, her sprawling house, her luxury car, her stock portfolio to create a restitution fund. It would pay for years of physical and psychological therapy for the children. It would compensate the Hendersons, and it would completely rebuild the community shuttle program from the ground up. In the aftermath, a strange and wonderful thing happened. The community, fractured by fear and apathy for so long, began to heal itself, the shared trauma becoming a shared bond. The healing wasn't perfect or immediate. It was scarred and difficult. The replanting of the Hendersons' rose garden became a quiet, weekend-long affair. I found myself there one sunny Saturday, my sleeves rolled up, digging in the rich soil alongside Mr. Henderson and a handful of other neighbors. It wasn't a party. It was a vigil. I watched Mikey, from his wheelchair, reach out to touch the soft petal of a new David Austin rosebush that Mr. Henderson offered him. His hand trembled slightly, a faint, persistent tremor that hadn't been there before the crash, a physical remnant of the terror. He drew his hand back quickly, a flicker of fear in his eyes. Mr. Henderson just nodded, a deep, sad understanding passing between them. The new garden was beautiful, but it couldn't erase the memory of the old one, or the sound that had destroyed it. The resolution was not a single moment, but a new, sustained, and infinitely better reality. Months later, a brand new, state-of-the-art shuttle, gleaming and equipped with every safety feature imaginable, pulled up to the curb. A new driver, a kind-faced man named George, who had passed a rigorous screening, greeted Mikey by name and asked him about his science project. Mrs. Gable walked with her son to the bus. As the lift whirred and gently raised him inside, she smiled and waved. But I saw her other hand clench into a white-knuckled fist at her side. When the bus pulled away, she stood watching until it was completely out of sight, and only then did she allow herself a single, quiet tear. It was a tear not of just fear, but of profound relief, a milestone passed on a long, arduous road. At a community picnic that autumn, the air was crisp and clear, filled with the scent of grilling burgers and freshly cut grass. Children's laughter was the only loud noise. I was no longer an undercover observer, but simply Elias, a neighbor. Mrs. Gable approached me, a genuine, unburdened smile on her face. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing us, for hearing us when we were too quiet to speak for ourselves." I shook my head, looking out at the vibrant mosaic of families and friends, a community transformed not into a perfect ideal, but into something more real, more resilient, and more compassionate. "You did this," I replied, "and I had never meant anything more. You all did. You just needed to remember you could." The memory of the shriek of metal would never fully fade from Oak Creek. It would always be a part of their story, an ugly scar on the town's soul that proved they had survived. But listening now, to the sounds of the picnic, of sizzling burgers, of idle chatter, of children's games, I realized something profound. The echo of the crash was a faint, distant thing, a ghost of a sound. Today, for the first time, the sound of Mikey's laughter was louder,